A minute lump of matter exploded, and we have the cosmos. These particles came together by chance, bumped into each other, and formed a planet Earth by chance. Non-living particles came together to form life. No one has ever observed any facts to support these statements. It tells us that the Creator made everything.
Good morning, everyone. It is a great privilege for me to be here this morning and to do an overview of an entire 13-part seminar series that we have entitled Searching for the Truth on Origins. This morning, we have the challenge of trying to condense 13 parts into one particular presentation that will sort of give you an overview of the creation-evolution debate. And so we have a great challenge to try to put all of this information into a very short period of time in one presentation. Our topic deals with the subject of origins, which is a very important question that everyone has. And we've all asked these questions at one time or another. How did it all begin? How did I get to be who I am? Am I merely the product of chance and time? Or is there a creator who made all things? How can I know the truth about origins? We are going to be examining the claims of the two views, and when it comes to the subject of origins, really there are only two choices. You can choose to believe in evolution, chance and time, or you can choose to believe that there is a creator who brought all things into existence by design. The two views: evolution, a natural process; creation, which is based on revelation that is given to us by the Creator, found in the Bible. And as we cannot go back into the distant, unobservable past, we must look at what we observe in the present. That is the facts, the observable evidence. Do the facts support evolution, or do the facts support creation? And as was mentioned in the introduction, I have the unique opportunity of actually being involved in both particular perspectives when it comes to the subject of origins. But now, as a Christian who believes in creation, I will present to you as best as I can the claims of evolution as evolutionists have chosen to believe, and the claims of creation as creationists choose to believe. And then you can make your own decision which of the two views is true. Well, let's begin where it all began, and that is the origin of the universe. How did that occur? Was it the result of a big bang, an explosion of matter? Or was there a creator, as the Bible describes, who brought all things into existence? Well, let's quote a statement given to us by Carl Sagan from his book Cosmos, page 246. Former promoter of the Darwinian evolution view, now deceased. This is what he stated. 10 or 20 billion years ago, something happened, the Big Bang. The event that began our universe. Why it happened is the greatest mystery we know. That it happened is reasonably clear. All matter and energy now in the universe was concentrated at extremely high density, a kind of cosmic egg reminiscent of the creation myths of many cultures, perhaps into a mathematical point with no dimensions at all. So notice what he has stated. He's not sure when it happened, maybe 20 billion, maybe 10 billion years ago, but he is certain that it happened. That is, that a very minute lump of matter, well, he says perhaps with no dimensions at all, exploded, and as a result of the explosion, we have the cosmos and everything in it. You see, this is a typical evolutionary view. All things exist. The galaxies, our solar system, and all of the various planetary bodies in our solar system have arisen as a result of an explosion of matter plus time. In fact, our planet Earth and everything on this Earth including you and me, they say, has arisen as a result of an explosion. But we need to ask some questions. Has anyone ever observed an explosion which has produced order? Of course, the answer is no. Explosions bring about chaos and disorder, never order. And we know that given time alone, systems proceed in a direction from order downwards to disorder, never the other way around. So the very foundational principle of the evolutionary idea is in question. You see, creationists believe that the design that they see in the heavens points to the reality there is a creator. We're looking at the moon. At particular times in the Earth's history, when the moon passes between the sun and the earth, this particular phenomenon occurs. It's called an annular eclipse. And there you can see it looks like the moon is exactly the same dimension or the same diameter as the sun. It has completely blocked the sun out. You can see the solar flares poking out each side of the moon. Now, why does this phenomenon occur? Everyone knows that the diameter of the sun and the diameter of the moon are not the same. It can be measured, and the diameter of the sun actually is 400 times greater. So why does it appear this way? Well, it has something to do with the positioning of the moon between the sun and the earth. And when we measure the distance of the sun from the earth and the moon from the earth, we discover that the sun just happens to be exactly 400 times further away. That's why this phenomenon occurs. Was this by chance, or does this point to the reality that there is an intelligent creator, designer? The creationists would say clearly, God has created the sun, the moon, and the earth. Now we move on to the subject of the origin of the earth. Was it by chance or design? According to the evolutionary view, we quote from Jury Van de Hever from his book Prehistoric Life, page 6. First, the question is asked, how was the earth formed? And then the answer, from an enormous cloud of gas and dust. In fact, our whole solar system was formed this way. It started out as a spinning cloud that began to shrink under the influence of gravity. This increased the temperature and pressure of the cloud. The circular movement shaped the cloud into a flat disk spinning around the center, where the sun was forming. As the particles around the disk bumped into each other, more and more of them stuck together to form planets. You see, a statement in the name of science, but no science. No one has ever observed such a process which has occurred. And could you imagine the chance of this happening? Our planet Earth, which is placed in the right place so that life can exist with all of the right conditions? They say it happened by particles bumping into each other. But the creationist view makes it clear there is a creator who specifically created this planet, which has the conditions to support life. The right atmosphere so that life could exist. That our planet is the right distance from the sun so that we can have the right temperature. If our planet was slightly closer to the sun, it would be too hot. If it was slightly further away from the sun, it would be too cold. We have the right gravitational field. We have the presence of water. We have an ozone layer which protects the earth from harmful shortwave radiation. All of these things are in place so that life can exist. Either it happened by chance, or it was because there is a creator, designer. Now with the origin of life, again, two views. Evolution believes that life originated from non-life in the distant, unobservable past, purely as a matter of chance. When the creation view is that there is a God who created life, who brought life into existence. Once more, we look to a statement by an evolutionist, scientist, Raymond Hockey, from the book Evolution, The Story of the Origins of Humankind, page 1. And I quote, "After countless chance encounters between organic molecules, an event as miraculous as that which created the universe occurred in the depths of the seas. About 3,500 million years ago, groups of organic molecules came together to form living cells from which all life was ultimately to descend."
You see, all of us have seen at one time or another this typical illustration. Life takes hold on an infant planet. In the left-hand bottom corner, we see lightning bolts striking water. Well, they call it the primitive pond. And then above that, we see the appearance of atoms, and then these atoms become molecules. And then the molecules become more complex molecules, and then we see the appearance of a cell, and then a multicellular creature. And this, we are told, is how it occurred. But the reality is this: no one has ever observed non-life becoming life. In fact, scientists have looked at the possibility of a protein molecule coming into existence by a process of chance. Protein molecules are building blocks of cells. And they've come to the conclusion that the possibility of that happening would be 1 over 10 followed by 56 zeros, which is an extremely small possibility. How small? Well, this illustration was given. It would be like buying a ticket and winning the lottery. But you would also have to buy a ticket next week and win the lottery the second week in a row, and the third week in a row, and the fourth week in a row. In fact, every week in a row, without missing a week, for 1,000 years. That's the possibility of a protein molecule coming into existence by chance. You see, there isn't a chance that it could have happened that way. The creation view is very clear. God created life with the ability to reproduce after its kind. And when we look at life, that's exactly what we observe. All life that we've ever observed comes from life which pre-exists. And this is a law of biology called the law of biogenesis. Life reproduces after its kind. And by the way, that can also be observed. As we look at living creatures, we see that life can vary or change within genetic boundaries, but always horizontally. For example, within the dog kind, there are many different variations, but in every case, they're dogs, whether they're small or whether they're large. And no one has ever observed something becoming a dog or a dog changing to become something else. If evolution is true, certainly this must have occurred. You see, when we think of evolution, we think of this man, Charles Darwin, who's often been called the founding father of evolution. He was one of the contributors. And what Charles Darwin actually observed is variation of life that can occur within genetic boundaries. You'll recall that he went to the Galapagos, and there he noted that what he called, through a process of natural selection, variation could be observed within the finch kind. There were finches with short beaks, medium beaks, and long beaks. So he noted that through time, the beaks of finches could change. And that's true, that does happen. Natural selection allows life to vary and change, but within genetic boundaries. The finches remain finches. When he went back to England, he did research in his own gardens with roses. And it was noted that roses have the ability to vary slightly within genetic boundaries, but in every case remain roses. That's natural selection. But the fact is, it does not provide a mechanism for what evolution now proposes, and that is that through time, a single-celled organism, given enough time, given enough chance, can produce all the forms of life which we see around us, including ourselves. And you will note that this kind of change must take place in a vertical direction. But what did Darwin observe? He observed variation that took place horizontally within genetic boundaries. And in no way does this provide the mechanism for the claim of evolution, that through time, simple can become complex, that lower can become higher, that a single-celled organism can become a man given enough time. The whole evolutionary assumption, based on gradual change through time, is inaccurate. Here, the typical Darwinian tree, we see that at the tips of the branches are various kinds of life. And the belief is that given enough time, all of these kinds have evolved. But you will notice that between the kinds, which are on the tips of the branches, there are gaps. For example, between the reptilian kind and the bird kind, you will note that there is nothing there that is drawn to represent an intermediate. And the reason that there's nothing there to draw is because there's nothing that's ever been found that's an intermediate. If it were true that reptiles have become birds, there would be countless millions of examples of creatures with front legs becoming wings. Not one has been found. Now we move on to another area, dealing with the complexity of life. How did it occur? Can we explain the complexity of life simply by chance and time? Or does the complexity of life point towards the reality of an intelligent designer? Well, first of all, we look at a cell. The cell is the basic unit of life. I mentioned earlier that we can't even show how a protein molecule can evolve by chance. Protein molecules are building blocks of cells. The cell is the unit of life. And here you see within the cell wall there are a number of structures. They're called organelles. They all have specific purpose and function. And to describe even one of them in detail, and the molecular complexity and the processes that occur so that life can exist, well, we would be here for days. A cell is very, very complex. It cannot be explained in any way by a process of accumulated mistakes through time, which, by the way, is one of the mechanisms which evolutionists say has brought about the complexity of life. That is, mutations. Well, we know that mutations do occur, but they don't bring order and complexity. For example, in the Drosophila, it's been bombarded with everything imaginable. Temperature changes, chemical changes, radiation. And all kinds of mutations have been induced, but in every case, they're either degenerative or lethal. For example, bent wings or no wings or various eye color variations, but always fruit flies. No one has ever seen the fruit fly changing to become something else because of mutations. 99.999% of mutations are degenerative or lethal. So in no way can we point to mistakes that are taking place in the genetic code as a mechanism for increasing order and complexity. Speaking of the genetic code, what we're looking at here is an illustration of the DNA molecule which makes up our chromosomes, the blueprints of life. Amazing complexity. Every one of us came from a single cell, and within that single cell, the chromosomes that were made up of the DNA molecules that contained the code or the information that produced our entire bodies. Think of this incredible complexity. Someone has suggested if we could reduce every person on the planet down to the blueprints from which they came, that is the DNA molecule from that first cell, if you could take all of the blueprints for the entire world's population, over 6 billion people, and take those blueprints and store them, what size of a container would be required? The answer may surprise you. A container the size of an aspirin tablet. You see, that's complexity beyond our comprehension. And yet that is the kind of complexity that evolutionists must be able to explain if they are going to say that the complexity of life has arisen by chance. This morning you're looking at a number of visuals, and as your eyes are looking at the screen, frequencies from the electromagnetic spectrum are being sent back to your eyes, and your eyes are picking up these frequencies that are being focused to the back of your eye, and every single image that you see this morning will be recorded in memory in your brain for as long as you live. Now, this is an amazing, complex process. But we are told it happened by chance. Evolution explains the complexity of life. But no one would ever suggest that a video camera, which does the same thing, happened by chance and time. Obviously, it requires engineering, skill, and design. Or think of our own bodies. Our bodies are made up of various organs.
And these organs are necessary or we don't exist. Evolution makes the claim that organs, well, in all of the life that we observe, simply has happened gradually through time. How can you explain the origin and the development of an organ system by a process of chance and accumulated mistakes? It is impossible. You see, hearts can't evolve. Either a heart must be in place, the circulatory system, the arteries that take the blood to the cells, and then returning the blood to the heart by the venous system, and then to the lungs to be oxygenated. All of that system has to be in place, or you don't have an organism. It can't happen by chance and time. Or how could a brain evolve? It's impossible. Or think of this, reproduction. In order for there to be reproduction, there must be a male and a female in the species. The male must have the reproductive organs to reproduce himself by one half genetically to produce the sperm cell through a complex process of reduction division called meiosis. The female must have the reproductive organs to reproduce herself by one half genetically to produce the egg cell containing half the number of chromosomes of the adult. And then the two cells come together to become the first cell of the next generation, which then must be incubated in a mother's womb that must be in place. And then through a complex process of mitosis or cell division, embryological development, the fetus develops over a period of time, and at the right time, it's born, either male or female. An incredibly complex process that must be in place, must be functioning in order for this process to occur. How can that be explained? One of the things that I do is travel to a lot of different places giving lectures similar to this, and particularly in countries where people were forced to believe in evolution for many years, like the former communist countries. Since 1990, we've traveled to the former Soviet Union many, many times by invitation of scientists and education officials. It was a few years ago, I was speaking at a symposium in Moscow on the subject of origins. And my topic was problems for Darwin. And one of the problems that I presented was this situation here. That is the impossibility of explaining reproduction by accumulated mistakes through time. And after making the presentation in the question and discussion period that followed, and there were over 400 Russian scientists and engineers that were present, one of them stood up, and I heard him say through the simultaneous translator, he said, "I've been challenged today by what has been stated." He said, "I guess all of my life I've simply accepted what I have been told and haven't thought through some of these things." But he said, there must be some answers. He said, "There's a lot of us gathered here today." He said, "Is there anyone here can help me to understand or has an explanation for how reproduction could have evolved?" And there was silence. Until finally another Russian scientist stood up. And again, I heard him say through the translator, he said, I don't have an answer, but he said, I have a suggestion. He said, "Today in our midst is Russia's most prominent evolutionist, Dr. Gao from the University of Moscow. He has written many books on the subject of evolution." And he simply challenged Dr. Gao. He said, "Dr. Gao, do you have a response to this?" And I will never forget this as long as I live. I looked over to my right, and in the front row, not far from where I was standing, this man was seated, and he said, as he stood to his feet, he said, "All of my life I have considered some of these problems, but," he said, "I have to admit, I do not have any answers." You see, there are no answers for trying to explain the complexity of life by chance processes. It points to the reality that there has to have been a creator. And of course, the Bible tells us who the creator is. Now, we also know that when God created, things were perfect. They were good. But we know that that perfect creation became imperfect as a result of man's sin, Genesis chapter 3. And from that point on, things began to degenerate. And by the way, that's why we have mutations, mistakes in the genetic code, and death.
The creation model will help us to understand. Now, let's move on and look at another phase of the creation-evolution controversy, and that is the history of life. Two views. We can trust and believe in man's view or man's speculation regarding what has occurred in the past, or we can consider what God has said about creation in His Word, in the Bible. First of all, the evolutionary perspective. This chart was put together in the late 1700s by individuals who were looking for a way to explain Earth's history. It's called the geological chart. And you will see that on the chart there are a number of layers stacked one on top of each other. These layers supposedly were formed over millions of years by the same kinds of processes that we see happening in the world today. Same amount of erosion, same amount of volcanic activity, same amount of flooding. And they say that the layers took long, long periods of time to be deposited. You see, they weren't there, they're simply making the assumption. And then they say that the first layers that were deposited, those at the bottom of the chart, are the oldest. And then as we go up the chart, the layers become more modern till eventually at the top of the chart, these are the most recent deposited. On the right side of the chart, we see various life forms beginning at the bottom with single-celled organisms associated with the supposedly oldest layers. And then as you go up the chart, various kinds of life were arbitrarily assigned in the order which evolution claims they developed, till eventually at the top of the chart we have modern man associated with the most recent layers of deposition. And then on the left-hand side of the chart, there are various names or the time periods, and these are in hundreds of millions of years before the present. Now, this is all very interesting, but can we verify these assumptions? For example, how were these layers formed? Well, we know that there are layers, that's not a question. In fact, on every continent, there's evidence of layers being deposited, and we know that the vast majority of these layers were deposited by water. They're called sedimentary in nature. But how long did it take the water to lay them down? Was it millions and millions of years, or could it have been catastrophically? Another question is, are we able to find the chart as we see it in the textbook in that sequence? And the answer to that question is only in one place in the world, and that's in a textbook drawing. If you were to take a drill core and drill down through the layers of the earth anywhere in the world, you're not going to find that sequence. It's a theory based on putting layers together from various places and then assigning them in the order that they believed they were deposited. So there are some serious assumptions, and some of these need to be challenged. Creationists who have believed in the creation view have always believed that the layers were formed as a result of a global catastrophic event and that it happened quickly. But is there a way to support this view? Well, there is. You see, it was in 1980, and then again in 1982, that Mount St. Helens erupted in northwestern United States. And, of course, it was a volcanic eruption, but associated with there were a number of things which occurred causing geological features. Trees were blasted flat to the ground in an area 150 miles surrounding the volcanic cone. And then in 1982, the second part of the eruption series, there was a mud flow that came down the northern slope of Mount St. Helens, which caused an erosional process to occur which created this canyon that you see in a matter of hours. The materials that had been deposited previously were, of course, still soft. And so here is the effect. And when we looked at the wall of the canyon, note what you see. The top layer was formed in 1982. The layer beneath, made of numerous layers, was formed in 1980, as was the layer beneath. And if you were to take a geologist to this location, blindfolded, and let him view what you see, he would interpret this as layers being deposited over long periods of time. But you see, there are other places where we can find similar things. This is the island of Hawaii, and that's the Kilauea crater. And in the background, you will note there is a ravine, which we walk to, and here's what you see. Layers. These have been deposited within the last 10 years. And as you look at them in a closer detail, you can see minutely deposited layers were formed as a result of volcanic activity in a short period of time. So it is a fact that layers can be formed quickly and catastrophically. And if that is true, the whole evolutionary assumption of the geological chart is in error. Now, we want to look at another example showing that the evolutionary assumptions are in serious question. This is a mountain. It's called Mount Yamnuska. It's in the Canadian Rockies. It's between Banff, Alberta, and Calgary, Alberta. And you will see this if you drive down the number 1 highway. This mountain is upside down geologically. That is, the top layer that you see here, because of the fossils that are found in it, belongs to a period of time called the Cambrian, which is one of the oldest layers in Earth's history. But the bottom of the mountain, because of the fossils that are found in it, belongs to a period of time known as the Cretaceous, which is supposedly hundreds of millions of years younger. So this creates somewhat of a problem. Here you have an older layer on top of a younger layer. How could that be? Well, they say that the layer that is on the top was on the bottom, but it lifted up gradually over hundreds of millions of years, and then it moved horizontally, so now that the old is on top of the young. Well, there are thousands of square miles like this, not only in Canada, but the United States and other parts of the world. The geological view, based on gradual deposition of layers and this sequence, in an orderly sequence of evolutionary change with the fossils in that sequence, is in question. Then what is the alternative? The evolutionary view we have presented. The alternative you can find in the Bible, the creation view. And by the way, the Bible tells us that if we simply trust in what God has said, it will give us insight and understanding. Psalm 111, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all they that do his commandments. His praise endureth forever. Or Psalm 119, verse 104, 105. Through thy precepts I get understanding. Therefore I hate every false way. Your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Now, what I want to do is just simply go to God's word. The Bible says he's the creator. The Bible says he inspired the Bible to tell us about creation. And just look at a few principles. And the first one we're going to simply paraphrase. It's in Genesis 1, verses 6 and 7. And this is what God tells us in these two verses. He says he created the earth with water on the earth. And then he separated the water that was on the earth from water that was above the earth by the firmament or the expanse. So what does that mean? Well, if we take it literally, it may mean something like this. This is an artist's illustration describing just what I stated. God creating the earth with water on the earth and then separating the water on the earth from water above the earth. Now, it's not a photograph. I was not there in the beginning of time and had this picture taken. And I'm simply presenting this to you as a model based on what the scriptures say. Some form of water may have surrounded the earth in the past. We don't know how high above the earth the water was. We don't know what condition the water was in, whether it was gas or liquid or ice. We don't know the thickness of the water layer. We're simply proposing there was some form of water surrounding the earth. By the way, Venus has carbon dioxide that enshrouds Venus. Now, one other point, as you look at the water on the earth, the Bible says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 9, it was gathered together in one place. There was one large landmass. And scientists tell us that the original earth had one large landmass which broke apart into the continents at a later period of time, after the layers were laid down. So this is a model. We call it the canopy model. The water above the water canopy. The water on the earth gathered together in one place, one large landmass. Now, if there was such a situation in our early earth, obviously our planet would be much different. And the best way to try to understand what it would be like would be to compare the original Earth to a greenhouse effect, where long-wave radiation from the sun passes through the panes of a greenhouse, and it's trapped within the greenhouse and produces vigorous growing conditions for plants. If the original Earth was surrounded by some form of water, the entire planet would have been like a greenhouse or like a terrarium. And we would expect that there would have been an equal heating of the Earth's surface from pole to pole. Not like the planet today. On the right, where we see that the polar regions do not receive as much energy as equatorial regions. Because of this, there's an unequal heating of the Earth's surface. And because of unequal heating, we have the movement of air masses, hot and cold air masses, high and low air pressures that tend to equalize. And because of this, it triggers off storms, weather conditions, rain, snow, typhoons, hurricanes. In the original Earth, if the entire surface heated equally, there would have been a consistent kind of a climate. And if that was the case, there wouldn't have been any rain. And by the way, the Genesis record tells us at this period of time, there was no rain, only a mist that rose up from the ground. So this is a model. One other thing, if there was some form of water surrounding the Earth, it would have also helped to protect the Earth from harmful shortwave radiation. And life would have been able to live longer. And speaking of life living longer, we know that we read through the Genesis account of the genealogies that the lifespan of man at this particular period of time was approximately 900 years. Something was different if humans could live that long. And if humans could live that long, what about other forms of life? And if life could live longer and grow under these vigorous growing conditions, it would be reasonable to suggest that we would find giantism in the fossil record, because we know that some forms of life grow larger if they live longer, for example, like reptiles. So these are some possible things that we would expect if the Earth was as the Bible describes. But we need to find some facts or evidence to support this, or otherwise it's just a myth. Let's look at some of the facts that seem to support this view. For example, here's some palm leaf fossils that I found in the northern part of Vancouver Island. And they've been buried in volcanic materials. Some catastrophe has occurred and buried palm trees. In a place today where palm trees do not grow in a natural condition. The past, they grew there. But there are palm trees found all over the planet. I'm pointing to the North Pole, and you will notice there are two different groups of islands that I have circled. To the left, the New Siberian Islands, and to the right, the Spitsbergen Islands. Do you know that in the New Siberian Islands, the first person to discover these reported in the literature that he saw fruit trees with green leaves and fruit on the branches frozen in the ice? Do you know that all over Siberia, there are mammoths that are caught and frozen in ice, and they have summer vegetation in their mouths, in their stomachs? They were caught as a climate change suddenly. In the Spitsbergen Islands, they have found palm trees, fossilized. They have found the remains of coral, which only exists in temperate waters, and even coal. So the climate definitely was different in the past than it is today. Or here's another map of the Northern Hemisphere. And I'm pointing to two lines, dark lines, which are called the present-day tree lines. You see, our planet has two tree lines on the North Pole and the South Pole. Just like at a mountain altitude, certain altitude, the trees stop growing. The same is true on the planet Earth. And there we see in the Northern Hemisphere, north of the tree lines, today there are no trees. But in the past, notice the area of detail. This is the Axel Heiberg Island. A number of years ago, some geologists that were flying in a helicopter over this area looked down. They couldn't believe their eyes. They saw tree stumps. And so when they landed and did some excavation, well, these were redwood trees. Some of them grew, they believed, 150 feet tall. They're still organic. You can take the wood and you can burn it. In neighboring islands, they found giant crocodiles, giant alligators, giant turtles. So here we are in the Canadian Arctic, and it was very similar based on the fossils to the Florida Everglades. The same is true in the southern hemisphere. Another thing we mentioned, that there should be giantism if the climatic conditions were part of a canopy model. And we find this. Moss-like plants grew 3 feet or more in height. Horsetail reeds today grow 2 or 3 feet in marshy areas, in the past 90 to 120 feet tall. Insects were much larger. Dragonflies, wingspans over 3 feet. Cockroaches 15 inches long. Ferns of the past over 90 feet tall. Shells of the past 12 feet in diameter compared to a few inches of their counterparts today. Sloths of the past 20 feet tall compared to the size of a small monkey today. Rhinos of the past 18 feet tall, 32 feet in length. This is a model of a rhino based on fossils found in Nebraska. Or in the past, we see great reptilian creatures like crocodiles that were found in the Sahara Desert. Now you may say, crocodiles in the Sahara Desert? How could they live there? Well, the Sahara Desert in the past was not a desert. It was a jungle. Something has occurred to the Earth's climatic conditions. These creatures grew to tremendous sizes, rivaling some of the dinosaurs. And speaking of dinosaurs, when we think of large, we think of these creatures. They're found all over the planet, buried from pole to pole, in the layers of the earth, associated with subtropical vegetation. What happened to them? Well, we've already described the possible reason for climatic differences in the past, but that's a good question. What happened to these creatures? Or perhaps a better question would be, why do we have fossils? They're not forming today, but in the past we have fossils of creatures all over the world. What happened? And the answer from the Genesis record is that God, who created the earth perfect, and after it became imperfect because of sin, destroyed the original creation because of man's sin. And God preserved life, a remnant of each kind, man and other kinds of life. And he brought this great destruction, as recorded in the Genesis record, when the fountains of the great deep broke up, in reference to the earth's crust fracturing. And when the earth's crust fractures, out of the earth comes magma, hot, molten materials. This was a worldwide event. It was happening all over the planet, under the oceans, on the land. Simultaneously, the Bible says the windows of heaven were opened, a cosmic catastrophe in which materials were rained down from above. Thirdly, the Bible says that there was rain. It was the first time that it had rained, but a minor source of the flood waters, because the planet already is covered by 2/3 with water, and a slight rising of the ocean beds and a sinking of the land masses. The entire surface of the planet would have been covered by hundreds of millions of cubic miles of water that would move from place to place, tremendous waves, the Bible describes, that assuaged, sweeping over the land masses, and as a result, a mechanism to bring about the destruction of life and the burial of life. At the end of the great flood, the waters draining back into the oceans, causing erosional forces, huge canyons, and we would expect that the Earth's surface would be completely changed. Layers deposited, and in those layers, the remnants of life forms preserved. Well, that's the flood model. But as with the canopy model, if there isn't any evidence to support this, then again, it's nothing more than a myth. But there's ample evidence to show that this earth has been devastated in the past. I'm pointing to the Hudson Bay. Surrounding it, the red area, is the Canadian Shield, an outflow of magma that is poured onto the surface of the earth from within the earth. There are various places on our planet where huge flows of magma have occurred. Here in Alberta, in Canada, in the Drumheller area in the Red Deer Valley, we see layer upon layer upon layer of volcanic ash and mud and coal seams. They go down into the earth thousands of feet, and it's in these layers they find dinosaurs, some of them in swimming positions, buried with fish and clams. Or in northern United States, Yellowstone National Park, huge trees buried to the depths they've been covered by volcanic material. Or in Arizona, huge trees buried in volcanic debris in log jams. Something has occurred in Earth's history that has brought about rapid burial and destruction of life. Fish found all over the planet, fins extended, eyes bulging. Fish that have been caught, obviously, by catastrophe, not dying gradually. Today, when fossils die, of course, they rot. In the past, something happened that preserved them. Reptilian creatures. And there are many examples showing very clearly that something has occurred in Earth's history that has brought about the destruction of life exactly the way the Bible claims. Like this tree in Tennessee that goes through more than one layer, and each layer, according to conventional evolutionary theory, represents millions of years. The evidence points towards a creator who created and a creation that was destroyed. Now our final area. Where did we come from? There are two views when it comes to the subject of the origin of man. Either we have evolved from brute ape-like creatures, or God created man, and man has always been man, made in the image of God. The conventional view goes something like this. The further back you go in time, the more primitive we were. We've all seen the paintings and the murals and the models. But there's one interesting thing that needs to be pointed out. There are no living intermediates. You see, they're all extinct. And so scientists must reconstruct the alleged lineage of man based on fragments of fossils. But nevertheless, they feel capable that they can do this. And so we've all seen these visuals showing us what our ancestors were like, but based on what kind of evidence? Let me give you a couple of examples. Here's a Time magazine, July 23rd, 2001. Meet your newfound ancestor, a chimp-like creature that stood up and walked 5.8 million years ago. And we are shown this artist's representation of our ancestor. But based on what? Well, the Time magazine tells us exactly what was discovered. Here's the location in Africa. You see a group of scientists. They're looking for fossils. This scientist is panning for fossils, and he finds a tiny bone. It is a toe bone. This is all that was discovered. And from this toe bone, scientists felt capable that they could reconstruct what our newfound ancestor looked like. Or here are some footprints that were found in the late 1970s by Mary Leakey in Kenya that supposedly been verification of what our ancestors looked like. And in this area where you see the footprints, it's volcanic materials that have been deposited. They were soft when the alleged ancestor walked this way, as well as some other animals. Here in this particular photograph, you see the small amount of earth and grass that has been removed. And you will notice the examination of the footprints. Here in this visual, you see left, right footprints going through the volcanic materials. And you see a man standing next to one of the footprints, and his pant leg is rolled up. His sock is removed, and the National Geographic reports the form of his foot, that is the alleged ancestor's footprint, is exactly the same as ours, which means it's exactly the same. It's identical. Now, National Geographic, in order to commemorate this great discovery, brought a tracker to the location to identify the footprints and also an artist to reconstruct what the area looked like. And this is the artist's illustration. In the footprints that looked like guinea fowl footprints, the artist painted guinea fowl. They look like guinea fowl look today. In the giraffe footprints, a giraffe. In the elephant footprints, a herd of elephants. They look like elephants. In the rabbit footprint, a rabbit. It looks like a rabbit. Same with the ostrich. But in the footprints that look identical, exactly the same as yours and mine, well, you can see what the artist paints. Two-part baboon human creatures without any clothes on, one carrying a stick. And this is supposed to be science. You see, much of what is presented as science is not science. The creation view regarding the origin of man is very simple. Man has always been created as man. After the fall of man, we're told in the book of Genesis, chapter 4, man was capable of building cities, understood agriculture, could make and play musical instruments, could alloy minerals together, could write poetry and literature. They were very intelligent from the beginning. And after the flood, they were instructed to repopulate the earth, and instead they rebelled and they joined together and they built a city, the city of Babylon. And they built a tower, the Tower of Babel. God was angered by what they had done. They were attempting to communicate with the heavens, with the fallen spiritual world. And God confounded their language, and then they dispersed. And suddenly, worldwide, we see the emergence of great civilizations. They're building cities and pyramids. They're alloying minerals together. They're moving huge stone objects. Their artifacts reveal to us that the further back we go in history, more incredible were their accomplishments. But they had one thing in common. They rejected the Creator. They worshiped the creation instead. And as Paul tells us in the book of Romans chapter 1, for such God's wrath is revealed. You see, we have their artifacts, but these people have disappeared. In conclusion, we have looked at two views: evolution, a natural process of chance, and creation, a supernatural process which points to a creator. And we have looked at the facts, the observable evidence in the present. And we can choose whether it's evolution or creation. In the book of Job, chapter 12, verse 7, we read, "But ask now the beasts, and they shall teach thee, and the fowls of the air, and they shall tell thee. Or speak to the earth, and it shall teach thee, and the fishes of the sea shall declare unto thee. Who knoweth not in all these that the hand of the Lord hath wrought this?" You see, what we've been doing here today is we've been doing exactly what the Bible challenges us to do. Look at living creatures. Look at the earth, the layers, the fossils. And what will they tell you? That the hand of the Lord hath wrought this. It continues, "Whose hand is the soul of every living thing, and the breath of all mankind. Doth not the ear try words, and the mouth taste his meat?" You see, just as your mouth, your taste buds can determine what food is good to eat and what is not, and you will make a choice what you eat, so too you have been given a mind that is inputted with information that comes to us through our senses, through what we see and what we hear. And we are able to determine what is true and what is not true based on the subject of origins. We can believe what we've been told from the evolutionary view that it happened by chance, or we can believe what the scriptures reveal, that there's a creator who has created. I believe the evidence supports creation and a creator. And what the Bible tells us, that not only is there a creator, there is a redeemer. Who is the creator? And this redeemer, the Bible tells us, loved us so much, he gave his life for us. So whosoever would believe in him and who he is and what he's done, and whosoever acknowledge who we are and what we have done, could enter into a relationship with the Creator that would last for eternity. You see, creation is absolutely foundational to the Christian faith. There's evidence that supports there is a Creator. There has been a creation.